turns out to be like just a very rare thing in life, which is the willingness to think for yourself. Like, can you, do you have an idea that you believe in enough? And with tech entrepreneurship, it's got to be sort of by nature an idea that nobody else believes, or they would have already done it, and it's no longer like an idea for a startup. And so the nature of it is you come up with some idea that everybody thinks is really stupid, and then you think for yourself and go build it.
That is the voice of Ben Horowitz, and he'll be giving us 7 super tips on today's Super You podcast.
It's one small step for man.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
We choose to go to the moon, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
I have a dream.
You can't handle the truth.
7,
6,
5,
4,
3,
2,
1. Super You. Thank you for joining us for today's Super You podcast. I am your host, Eric Qualman. Most of you know me as Equal Man. Today we have billionaire Ben Horowitz. Hey Siri, who is Ben Horowitz?
Benjamin Abraham Horowitz is an American businessman, investor, blogger, and author. Should I keep going?
No, but I will. Ben Horowitz was born June 13th, 1966. He is a technology entrepreneur and co-founder, along with Mark Andreessen, of the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz. His early life and education: he was born in London, England, and raised in Berkeley, California. He attended Columbia University, where he got a BA in computer science in 1988, and then an MS in computer science from UCLA in 1990. He's gone on to make billions of dollars through his investments. And so here we are with 7 super tips from Ben Horowitz.
When I became CEO the first time, I asked all the kind of veteran CEOs, what should I focus on to be a great CEO? What should I do? And they pretty consistently said, Ben, pay attention to the culture. And I was, great. How do I do that? That's kind of where the advice stopped. And, most of the things written on it have been relatively trivial, based on one organizational behavior kind of experiment or something like that. And so, but when you look at it, it turns out to be a really important thing. So if you go, well, how does your company behave? Particularly how does it behave when you're not looking? Do they show up to meeting on time? If somebody calls them, do they return the call? If it's a person who's a lower rank than them, do they return it? Do they return it that day? Do they return it the next day? Do they return it the next week? All these things. If they do a deal, is it for the price or for the partnership? What are they optimizing? And so all those things, which are not in your goals and objectives, they're not in your mission statement, they're not in your OKRs, they're how you behave on a daily basis, how people experience your company, what you're like to do business with, what you're like to work at. All that stuff is your culture. But the amount of attention it's paid to in the management literature is like close to zero, or close to zero usefully. So I thought it was an important thing to try and get at, well, how do you move that? How do you shape it? How do you change it? Because you can't just do the simple thing. You can't say, oh, well, we'll put in your performance review, did you follow the cultural values? Well, you don't know if they received that phone call, so you definitely don't know if they returned it. So that's not going to be the thing that drives the culture. What's going to drive the culture are all these little behaviors, all these little cues that people take about, this is what I have to do to succeed in this company.
Horowitz works with many companies. He invests in many companies. And one thing he says, you've got to create a culture that encourages openness and sharing struggles and challenges. It's really, you need that feedback system. You shouldn't punish employees for getting obstacles out in the open. He really believes that a healthy company culture encourages people to share bad news. All right, moving on to good news. Here's tip number 2.
Culture is a very powerful thing, but very few people understand how it works or why it's so powerful. It turns out to be a much stronger force than a lot of the things that people end up focusing on, either in a company or in society. And so explaining and understanding how that worked has always just been a deep interest of mine. And it's funny, when I met Shaka, he was 19 years in prison, 7 years in solitary confinement and all that kind of thing, and led a prison gang and so forth. And most people read his book, and it was a story, for them of redemption, how this guy who went to prison for murder came out and became a best-selling author and kind of an activist for anti-recidivism and so forth. But for me, it was a story of leadership and somebody who really understood culture and how to develop it, control it, change it, and so forth.
It is crazy to think in the 80s, there's no CDs. And so, as Ben mentioned, you're taking a cassette and you're waiting at the radio for your song to play. And then you hit play, record. You hit 2 buttons at once, I believe, when I looked it up. So play, record, and then records on the cassette. And you didn't want commercials, so you had to be pretty good about cutting off the DJ. So we've come a long way. There's no Spotify, there's no Pandora, just getting whatever song you wanted. There's no Amazon Music. So the world is moving fast. So here we are, moving fast today. Tip number 3. Actually, before tip number 3, people always ask me, at Michigan State, what was the song my senior year that was played in the locker room constantly? I mean, it was on repeat for at least 2 months. It was Snoop Doggy Dogg's Sippin' on Gin and Juice. Now, there's a better version of that song, a remake, I think it's better, by the Gourds, which goes something like this. All right, now we truly are moving on to tip number 3.
Well, it's funny because when I was in college, the thing that I thought I was doing that was a huge waste of time was I was completely obsessed with rap music. And, I would listen to it constantly. And to the point where in those days, there were no rap radio stations, and there was no, and Yo MTV Raps hadn't come out yet or any of that stuff. And so there were only 2 rap shows, and they were only on one day a week on Saturday night. So I would never go out on Saturday night. I would sit at home because I had to record them. And then in those days, it wasn't like these fancy record to disc. You had a tape. You would press record, and then when it got to the end of the tape, you had to be there to flip it around and do it. And then if you were smart, you would be there to pause on all the commercials so that you could get more life out of your tape. So I missed all that college life, and I was like, wow, I probably wasted a lot of time. But now my whole career is kind of based on my affiliation with rap music. So it's what I'm known for. So that turned out to be good. I kind of wish I had studied more biology. I didn't. I was very interested in it, and I did not realize at the time that kind of information science and biology would connect when they did or in the way they did. I studied a little neurology in graduate school as part of AI, which was also seemed like a complete waste of time because AI didn't work for 25 years. But now it's working. So you never know. I guess I would say, anything that you learn is a good use of your time, probably.
Horowitz wrote his book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, because essentially he'd read these management books and they'd say these are the hard things about running a company, but those aren't really the hard things. So it inspired him to write his book. His old boss, Jim Barksdale, told him that most management consultants have never managed a hot dog stand. So anyways, here we are with tip number 4.
When I was CEO, I read almost every management book out there, and I would find myself awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, sweating, but still cold, I'm sweating. It must be hot, but I'm cold. And that's, I now know that's called a cold sweat, but didn't really know then. And I was like, why don't any of these management books help me? And then I kind of came to realize that they were all designed, all the management books I had read were designed to basically explain to you how not to fuck up your company. I'm sorry about the profanity. I have CEO Tourette's. But there was nothing like, once you've already screwed up your company, then what? Like, what do you do? And what do you do when you're in that situation, which I found myself in like big time, and a lot of people did, which is you're basically closed in. You have no options. You've got maybe one way out, and then the chances are you're dead. The chances are you're dead. You're not going to make it. And I had a few situations like that, like when I took my company public with 3 weeks of cash in the bank and so forth. And so I was always looking for something to help me with how do you even think about that when you're very, very likely not going to make it, and you've got 400 people working for you, and they're very likely going to have to get laid off, and how do you keep from just melting down right in your chair? And I read this book on this guy Toussaint, who basically led the only successful slave revolution in human history. So not just Haitian history or modern history, human history, one successful slave revolt. And his name was Toussaint Louverture, but that wasn't actually his name. His name was Toussaint. That was the name he was born with. Louverture was a nickname that came later. And where it came from was Napoleon was trying to defeat him. And he would ask his generals, he's like, how is it possible that this guy, this slave, running an army of slaves, can defeat you guys like the French army with all your military advantage, all the training, all the weapons, all everything? How is that even possible? What is going on? And they were like, look, we get them surrounded, we have them cornered, we have them outnumbered, and every time we think we're about to get them, all of a sudden there's an opening. And Louverture in French means the opening. So this word got back to Toussaint, and he nicknamed himself Toussaint, the opening, Toussaint Louverture. And so as CEO, I always thought, I should be Ben Louverture. And that's how I would get out of those situations. So that was the inspiration.
Horowitz strongly believes that nobody's born knowing how to be a CEO. It's a learned skill, and unfortunately, you learn it on the job. And the only thing that prepares you to run a company is actually running the company. Here we are with tip number 5.
Turns out to be just a very rare thing in life, which is the willingness to think for yourself. Do you have an idea that you believe in enough? And with tech entrepreneurship, it's got to be sort of by nature an idea that nobody else believes, or they would have already done it, and it's no longer an idea for a startup. And so the nature of it is you come up with some idea that everybody thinks is really stupid, and then you think for yourself and go build it. And one of the reasons we end up getting along is Nas had no choice. He ended up starting his whole life having to think for himself just like that.
True leadership is believing in your idea when no one else does. It's when everyone else thinks you're crazy. So when I wrote Socialnomics, everyone thought it was crazy because I was talking about social media for business and politics, when at the time, everyone thought it was just for teenagers. And so you had to stay with your conviction and go, wait, I'm not crazy. It's crazy that no one else can see this. And so you got to stay true to your course. Here we are with tip number 6.
Yeah, so, in the world of entrepreneurship, the big skills are kind of programming skills and people skills. Those are the big two. And I think people skills tend to be highly underestimated in terms of kind of just ability to run a company and so forth. And what I mean by people skills is the ability to understand other people's motivation and other people's motivations who you're talking to, and then who you're also not talking to, and how they're going to think about something and where they're coming from, and relate to that in a way that gets you to the right conclusion about how you build an organization or build a company or make a deal or any of these kinds of things is incredibly valuable. And that's what I would say most of the kind of good entrepreneurs end up lacking more than the technical skills that we see now. Like being like a boss level engineer, like that's extremely valuable. I'm not discounting that, but that's really the other big skill that you can learn in school.
You heard it from billionaire Ben Horowitz. It's all about that EQ. It's that emotional intelligence. Obviously, I'm biased with my initials EQ, but it's that self-awareness. It's that emotional intelligence. It's more Flintstone than Jetson. It's that soft skill over the tech skill. Now, you need both. Most companies have both. They have the soft person, soft meaning soft skill person, and then they have the technical person. But it's really, as far as that company goes, you need both. But Ben is kind of suggesting, and I agree with him, that really it's that person that has emotional intelligence that's going to lead the company. Here we are with our final tip, tip number 7.
Yeah, people go, oh, like where we are integrity. And you go, okay,
those are the people who usually aren't. Or
yeah,
sometimes.
And it can get very ambiguous in a company context. So for example, you go and you raise money from some venture capitalists. You say, look, we're definitely going to hit this forecast over the next 3 quarters. Then you're out selling your products and you're like, oh, we're a little short of the forecast. And you have a customer come in and you go, wow, like if we just told him this was going to be here in 2 months rather than in the 6 months it's really going to take, then we'd get the deal and we could keep our promise to the investors that we just made. But we'd be sort of lying to them. But how big a lie is that? You get into these kinds of things. So the definition of what you're doing and what you mean by integrity and in what context ends up being really important. And this is why, one of the things that Toussaint Louverture did in the slave revolution is, he was very, very, very big on this concept of, okay, we're going to distinguish our culture by being more ethical than the Europeans that we're fighting against. And one of the things that he did is he said, okay, look, everybody's pillaging. We're not going to pillage. But you can't just say you're not going to pillage because, okay, is that really the right thing to do? Because you're in this mercenary war over sugar. And you have to pay the soldiers. Your guys don't have any money. So you're really going to jeopardize the war over like this ethic that like nobody else here cares about. But what he said is, we're fighting for liberty. And you can't get liberty if you're taking people's liberty away. And so if you think about what that does, is it changes the whole motivation of the army. And so culturally now they're fighting for a higher cause. That then rippled out to the broader community, and the stories are like, the French came in, they set the plantations on fire, they, stole all the cattle, they, took everything, and then the slaves came in half naked, didn't take anything. And as a result, Toussaint got the local support for what he did. But like integrity works like that. It doesn't work like, oh, just do the right thing. So nobody knows what the right thing is.
Thank you, Ben, for those great 7 tips. I forgot to say how tall Ben is. He is 6'2". So he is 6'2". So he's shorter than me. So he's 6'2". As you know, I'm 6'7" on a sunny day, 6'6" on a cloudy day. Thank you for tuning in to today's Super You podcast. It is brought to you by Audible. Feel free to check out Ben's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, on Audible. It's 7 hours and 57 minutes, so just under 8 hours. Go and give it a listen, whether you're in your car, whether you're cooking, whether you're working out. It doesn't matter. You can go check that book out on audible.com. Big thanks to Jake Bryn, Savannah Pettinger, and also Kelsey Gomez for helping to produce today's show, the Super You podcast. They also want to remind me, a lot of people are reaching out. They're having a difficult time with focus. A lot of you out there are having a difficult, someone that's having a difficult time with focus during the pandemic. And we had read my book, The Focus Project. So I took snippets from that book and gave them away for free on this podcast. It starts July 28th. That is number 1. And it goes through September 18th, number 41. You don't have to listen to them in order. They'll make sense however you want to jump in there. Or maybe it's a friend, or maybe it's your son or your daughter that's really struggling with focus during these virtual times. And so again, great resources. July 28th, it starts with number 1. They're all labeled the Focus Project. They have a number after them on this Super You podcast. So go back and listen to those or have them listen to those podcasts. And obviously the book is on Audible as well. The Focus Project is on Audible as well. Thanks again for listening to the Super You podcast. My hope is it helps unlock and unleash that superpower that's within you. And until next time, this is Equal Man reminding all of us, it's not what we take from the world, it is what we leave behind.
And I'll be rolling down the street, smoking Indo, sipping on gin and juice, laid back, with my mind on my money.
7,
6,
5,
4,
3,
2,
1.
Super You.
Super You.